the only person who grew fast me during that period on medium.com was Barack Obama. So that kind of lent some credibility to what I was doing.
Wow. So the only person who grew faster than you was Barack Obama, the US president.
Yeah, and I feel like he's got an unfair advantage as well.
Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magecha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Amardeep Parmar. Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So we start the podcast with who is Amardeep. And so we're going to start exactly the same way, which is just give us a bit of an insight into who you are.
So it's a really tough question in many ways because I think there's so many different aspects of me that you try to make yourself simpler, I think, to just make the narrative simpler. But I think sometimes the things off the beaten track are actually what makes you interesting.
Okay.
So on the headline side of things, right? So I run the Bay HQ, which is biggest community for British Asian entrepreneurs and investors. And that's what my life work is at the moment. But then I also have all the other sides of me. So I've done dance for like 10 years. I did karate for like a decade. I've done all these different parts of me where I enjoy reading. I enjoy traveling, these different parts too. So when it comes to who I am, I think sometimes it's the element of who I am is shifting all of the time. And what I think is quite important is allowing myself to do that.
Yep.
So rather than being like, okay, 10 years ago I thought this, I've got to keep doing that. And I think sometimes people get trapped in their past self of, I said this all the time. It's like, actually, if you go back for the last couple of years and you look at my statements I've made, probably a lot of them I disagree with now in some ways. But that's a good thing because it means I've learned and I've had more conversations and I think differently now. So who I am today, I think is going to change a lot.
And it's amazing that you appreciate that what you said maybe 2 years ago, you completely disagree with, rather than I'm still drawn to that statement because I said it and therefore it's got to be wholly true. So I love that about that.
Yeah, sometimes I would look back and I should watch some old episodes. I think especially as it comes where, as your position changes, so for example, when I was at the beginning of what I was doing, then you think this is the way to go ahead. Whereas when you're on the other side of the table, you start to understand the other side a lot more. And then you start to realize, oh, the way I acted before was actually probably not the best way to act. But you're always stuck in your own world, right? Like everybody's got a universe in their own head.
Yep.
You think how your lens is how everybody views it. But when you're on the side, it's like, oh, actually, this is really annoying. I shouldn't have done that. But you learn and hopefully get better over time.
And so talk to us about how you would introduce yourself at a party, for example.
So actually, what I try to do is always get the other person to introduce themselves first. This little hack I have. Because then depending on what they say, I can frame what I do in a way that's interesting to them.
So you're a deflector as well.
Yeah.
We've had a few of those in the last few episodes where they do that tactic to just go, I'm going to tell you what I think you want to hear and keep it interesting for you, rather than go, here's my big long spiel and I like talking about myself.
Yeah, because what I do is quite varied. So on the Bay HQ side, right, we've got the media side, so it's the podcasts. We've got the event side. So we've done like, I think 1,500 people come to our events. We've got the futures side, which is internships, mentorships, school talks, university talks. And then we've also got the investment side too. And then I've also angel invested. I've done these other things too. And some of that is completely irrelevant to most people. And what I find is most people I meet are going to have a bit more of a simpler story, I guess.
Yeah.
So if they say, okay, I work in tech. Okay, cool. I can explain these things. If you don't work in that industry, then me explaining what I do has to take in a bit of a different lens. And if somebody's an investor, I'll talk more about the investment side. And I think I just do that just otherwise my entire life story can be quite complicated and long.
Yeah.
And then you end up, it's kind of fun in some ways to then have different conversations with different people.
Because then you're not repeating yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
In every
then you're targeting,
conversation.
like, okay, this person's interested in this area. Let's go down that route.
Yeah. And so tell me a bit about the Bay Network. And is that how you call it, not the BAE network? How do you talk about it?
So we call it Bay HQ.
Bay HQ.
Our idea is the pun on Bay. So the emails say, hey, Bays. So for us, it means British Asian entrepreneur. And obviously the affectionate term is before all else. So that's kind of used a lot. So it's when people see it, they're kind of interested, like, is this a dating site? What is this? So it gets that initial curiosity. But we started in October 2022. And initially it was just meant to be a side project of, we were getting frustrated that nobody in our community was really helping each other. And there's other communities that were helping each other a lot more.
Yep.
And it's like we were complaining a lot, but it's like we could do something about this. So there's one thing about complaining. I think that's where all good ideas start from. It's like you've got to be really annoyed by the problem. And then from that podcast, we then started the events and we grew out of there. But when we started, from what I'd done before, I built a good network of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and New York-based entrepreneurs who were all willing to help each other. They'll put me in touch with each other. Whereas, like, I'm born and raised in London, they wouldn't really connect me. They wouldn't really help me out. And it's like, well, how are all these people on the other side of the world who are like very advanced, some of them, being like, oh yeah, chat to this person, chat to that person, I'll do the connection. Whereas here, people are like, oh, I know these people, but it's like,
but they're my connections.
Yeah, but they're mine. Like,
I'm not going to share.
They want to show
them.
off about who they know rather than actually be like, oh, is there a bridge here that I can make? Or like, oh, I'm hosting an event, come to the event because you can meet these people. And that was just like, because of what I did in America, I could open some of those doors a bit because I could leverage that network and what I'd done out there, and it made people interested in what I'm doing.
Right.
And that opened up things further. And then since then, it just keeps pivoting. I mentioned earlier about how things have changed over time. If you look at those, I think at the beginning I used to do I should probably carry on doing this, the quarterly updates episodes. What I said in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, I probably haven't done half of that stuff. Like, oh, we're going to launch this, we're going to do that. And it's the nature of entrepreneurship, right? It's like you have a plan.
It changes on a regular basis, week by week, hour by hour.
But I think it'd be quite interesting to actually look back and see, like, what did I say I was going to do and what did I actually do? Because you have to react to the demand, right? It's like if everybody's saying, oh, we really want this, you go down that path rather than being like, no, this is my plan.
I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. And I think that's the important part. I think it's like the parallels of life and business there, right? It's like, don't just do something because you said you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Do it because it still makes sense. And when the information updates, you should change your plans based on that too.
So I'm going to take you back because I feel like we might go into a complete rabbit hole around entrepreneurship. And this is a podcast about who you are and where you come from and all of those great things. So I'm going to take you back and go, tell me about your younger years and where you grew up, what it was like, what was family like, etc.
So I grew up in a place called Barkingside, which is near Ilford. So I go to like Burn entering, you're like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, wagwan. So
what?
Yeah.
I come from East London, so I understood all of that. Yeah. But you just had a real little conversation with yourself.
Yeah. So now I enunciate because I had to learn that later on so people understood me. But growing up, so I was never gangster. I wouldn't pretend I was gangster, but it's just that's how people spoke in my area.
Yeah.
So I grew up in like a lot of the people that went to my secondary school were from Ilford. So my school was like 95% ethnic minority. And so I went to a grammar school, like even with the grammar school, so I was like 29th in border zone. So I only just about got in. And it was that kind of sliding doors moment of like my life could be very different if I went to a normal school or state school.
Yeah.
And for me, it's quite an interesting thing of like, is my life better because I went to that place or would the other path have led me somewhere else and how that have worked out?
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily one would life be better than the other, but it's just interesting. These like little tiny like knife edge moments where it could go either way. How would my life have gone? Would I have been, what kind of person would I have been otherwise?
Did all of your siblings go to the grammar school?
So my older sister didn't, and my little sister did. So it was a boys and girls school. So my sister went to the girls' school and I went to the boys' school.
Yeah.
And it was at that age, I think, when I was young, so let's say the early part of secondary school, I was very much a goody two-shoes. Like I never got any detentions, and like the only school was at class detentions. I got the best behaviour award in year 7.
Wow.
I was that little suck up. But part of it was that I think it was shyness, but it was also, I don't know, because it wasn't like, I never had this issue where, with my parents, it was very supportive. So it wasn't like I was good because otherwise like I'd get in trouble. I guess it was like self-motivation of being a suck up. I don't know why. But for some reason, that was just the way I was, where I was like very much obsessed with that kind of idea and getting good grades and things like that. But at the same time, like when I look back on it, so like GCSEs, they did well, but I didn't do amazingly. Mm-hmm. And what I found was interesting, and I think it's kind of affects what I do now, is that I didn't set myself like massively high standards because I didn't know what I was capable of in some ways. And then after GCSEs, I was like, wait, all these people that I was better than in class got better grades than me because they thought they could get much higher grades and they studied harder. And I was like, oh, okay, if I get this would be really good.
It's enough.
Yeah. And then I think that kind of changed me a bit more towards the end of secondary school, where I was then like, okay, like I almost got like frustrated that I didn't do as well as I I could have. Yeah, I was like, I have the ability to do it, but I didn't. Like, in some ways, there's a laziness about it too as I got a bit older, where because I could rest my and just coast a bit, I did, and then it kind of bit me back a bit.
Why do you think it bit you back?
I guess now in the overall picture, it hasn't really.
Yeah.
But at the time, I think it was just that I was much more focused on, as in, I just thought I could do it without having to necessarily do the work.
Right.
And
the laziness.
Laziness, right? And it's just, and it bit me back because the grades I got was good enough to get me to where I went to, but I could have probably worked a little bit harder, and that would have made the chance of some of the other universities that I applied to a bit easier.
Right.
And I think it was just that internal perception of myself changed a bit there. I was like, okay, I'm not living up to myself here in some ways.
And there was no pressure from parents, family?
Because I got the better, so I did better than my older sister. So there was no comparison points in some ways, right? Because when my family says both my parents moved over when they were under 10 years old. So it was a very different system back then, right? So, and I was one of the oldest grandchildren. So we didn't really have those comparison points. But it was in my own school that I was like, okay, I've ended up about midway here.
Where you could have.
Yeah, and then when it came to A-levels, and I got a lot higher, and I was achieved a lot more. But at the same time, I was always having things on the side. So I did cricket club, I did karate, and then karate carried on for a lot longer. Then air cadets. I was very lucky in that sense of my mum would drive me around, to shout out to her. So otherwise I had all these other things on the side that enabled me to kind of get a bit more well-rounded.
Yeah.
And especially with the karate, so karate I carried on doing for about 13 to about, just over a decade. So I got my black belt when I was 18. So I was teaching on the side of school as well, as a volunteer.
Yeah.
And I think I credit that a lot with my self-discipline now, and also my confidence, because I was teaching class 40 kids.
Yeah.
And as you
can
imagine,
one can mess with you in an alley.
That's interesting, because it was the whole insecurity thing of being in Ilford, right?
Yeah.
Of that, as a kid, I never got into a fight.
Yeah.
Mainly, but it was that fear of some ways of being around Ilford. There's at the time a lot of knife crime, there's acid attacks, all this kind of stuff, right? So even though nothing really actually that bad happened to me, I think I was very afraid, and that insecurity played into things a lot. So even though I was a black belt, at the same time, I knew that if I was in the alleys, then if I get stabbed, it doesn't matter what I know in some ways, right? You can't rest on that.
Yeah.
But I also think that kind of paranoia in some ways kind of instilled there that maybe it took me a long time to get more confident.
And were you confident as a kid?
I think I faked it a lot.
You faked it. What does that mean?
So I'd pretend to be confident, because in an all-boys school, a lot of people come from Ilford, it's you don't want to look like the person who's an easy target in some ways. So, and it's also something which in hindsight, I don't like necessarily about the way I acted, because you try so hard to be cool in some ways.
Yeah.
And it's why did I I could have just rested a bit more. But that then turns into you need to show you're strong all the time, that toxic masculinity side of things. And it wasn't in case of getting into fights or doing anything violent, but it's just a case of me not being able to, feeling the need to show I'm okay, I'm strong or whatever like that, which is just, it's just a bit silly, in hindsight. It's child, I'm a kid, right? So it's what it is. But that's what I look back on, and I think there was that insecurity side of me kind of being scared, so me needing to, I'm really, I needed to show you that I was good at stuff.
Yeah.
Which obviously isn't particularly, is when you've got that kind of chip on your shoulder, it comes across in some ways that you think you're better, whereas actually it's because I was insecure that I needed to act in a certain way.
And what was causing the insecurity? Because you said you were quite a bright kid. You were good and doing things outside of school. So where did that come from, do you think?
I think it's interesting. I think it's sometimes, I think I was a massive overthinker.
Okay.
That's one element of it. So I think now I'm a lot better. So when I was younger, I used to overanalyze everything. And I don't know why. I think it's just an overactive brain where I'd read into things and pick up signals that weren't really signals. And there was just this constant overthinking element. And I think that only really went away in my 20s when I kind of got a lot more relaxed about things. Where I think I was always almost placing myself within the crowd of okay, where am I? My ranking was really important to me. And it's just a weird thing to look back on of why did I care so much?
So you're in a group of, so just so that I've understood that correctly, you're in a group of 5 boys because you went to a boys' school, and you're working out where you rank in that group of 5 boys.
I think it's because I thought I wasn't very cool in many ways, right? And I think there's an element of like, okay, you can get the good grades and things like that, but
That doesn't make you cool.
yeah, it doesn't make you cool, right? And it's you as a kid, you want to be cool, you want to be liked, you want to be, and it wasn't that I wasn't liked, but it's just like I think I lacked the confidence, I was very introverted. So then when it was like one-on-one conversation, I wouldn't shut up. But then I was always like looking at the class clowns, people like that, being like, oh, like I don't have the guts to do that kind of stuff. I don't have the guts to like talk in front of audiences. And it's obviously funny considering what I do now.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
ironic.
But back then, it's like if there was a group, I'd get really nervous. Like I'd kind of start sweating if I was like talking to a group of 6 people. And I don't know what it was. I think I was just very self-conscious.
You didn't grow up in a massive family in
So-
terms of there were 3 of you as siblings, but
Yeah.
what about the extended family?
So when I was younger, there was like we were a lot closer. So we'd like at the weekends and stuff, we'd go over. And just trying to think back. So my granddad passed away when I was, 8 or 9? So after that, I think we saw each other like less after that, I guess, in some ways. But there's a couple of them I'm like fairly close to. But I think generally over time, we're not as close as we once were. So I used to live with one of my cousins, for example. But the extended family side, I don't know how much that played into things because we all kind of had separate lives, I guess.
Yeah. And were you all close in terms of location-wise? So
At the
were you-
when I was like a kid, yeah, but then like people
Everybody
moved. Yeah,
moved.
everyone spread out a bit more afterwards.
You talked about the insecurity being younger. What about today? Because you do a lot of public speaking. You talked about having your own podcast and 300 episodes, which is amazing. But that involves you having to be on camera, in front of people, events, etc. How does that show up today?
I think this shift came early when I was in my mid-20s, where I think what happened is that part of the thing of growing up as a guy in Ilford, Punjabi family and things like that is you feel like you can't show weakness. And in my mid-20s, it was a few of my friends I found out like they had like suicide ideation, they'd been on antidepressants. And these are people that I thought were so confident and so great. And then realizing that when they told, it was a weird period of about 2 or 3 months where I found this out about a few different people at once. And like one of my friend's brothers, like, passed away from like suicide. So it was like, wait, it's not just me that has this anxiety in some ways. And then I also was in some ways a bit cross with myself that these people who I'd known for so long and I thought were really close,
Weren't able to share.
yeah. And what I was quite happy about is in some ways is that I was one of the only people they ended up sharing it with. But they'd had these secrets that they were hiding from everybody in the world. And once I started realizing that, like, oh, okay, actually, there's a lot of people who feel different things or have different ways about them where maybe they're not so confident. And there are the people who just, I think they're confident, they're putting on an act as well. Then that enabled me to get rid of that masculinity, the toxic masculinity idea, I guess. And from there, I then started reading a lot more. I started doing a lot more work myself and self-awareness. And I think that's one of it, but it's also the other element is by that time, I'd done so many different things to kind of prove to myself, actually, no, I'm pretty good. Like, so whether it was karate, whether it was obstacle course racing, I'd had enough challenges of like, actually, I can get through things.
Yeah.
I don't need to put so much pressure on myself. And now it shows up. So I think the biggest change between, say, me now and me when I was 16 is when I was 16, I was constantly I was overanalyzing everything with the past and the future all the time. Whereas now I very aggressively live in the present.
Yeah.
So I've got an event tonight, 210 people signed up. I'm not really thinking about it. Like I should probably be thinking about it, but I know that I've done so many events now. I know the panelists very well. So it's like, it'll be okay.
Right.
And that's the attitude that just doing the sheer number of reps of different things I've done now, I trust myself. It's almost, I don't know if it's a masochist kind of thing. Like I like being in situations which are a bit out my comfort zone and I back myself to get through it.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting elements of this more recently is that, have you heard of the yips?
Yeah.
It's the idea of like, if I'm basically running on, okay, I can put myself in a situation that will work. What happens if one day there's just a catastrophic loss of confidence that comes from nowhere? What do I then do? What happens if I suddenly get nervous? And it's an interesting thing in some ways, because if my confidence is, okay, it's come from experience and things like that, but it's also an element of, I could just one day just lose it. And that's an interesting thing that I sometimes wrestle with, of there's still that underlying fear in some ways sometimes, where I think about like you said, like, how do I do what I do? I don't really know.
Yeah, because you're doing it all for the first time. But
Yeah.
for our listeners, just explain what IPS is.
So yips, I think it comes from golf. And it's where people who are very good golfers, all of a sudden they get an involuntary movement, which basically means they just lose the knack for it. Because I think a lot of what I do is based on that knack, is based on gut instinct.
Yeah.
And there's so many things from my experience that I haven't consciously processed, but my subconscious just knows what to do. So I just give over to that.
Yeah.
But if I don't know what I'm doing, then if my subconscious fails me for some reason, I'm screwed.
Which it will do at certain points, but also we learn from failure.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Because I remember, so there was, when my dad passed away, then after I came back to podcasting after that, I wanted to get back fairly quickly, because I was worried that if I left it too long, that my confidence would just be shot. And I initially started the podcasting because I didn't think I had the guts to do it. So when I first started back in July 2021, the reason I did it is because I hated the sound of my own voice. It was very uncomfortable, and I didn't think I was the type of person who could do it. And the idea, again, it was all, I think a lot of things I start, it's for that challenge rather than thinking, okay, this is my new life dream, whatever it is. And at that initial stage, it was like, I was crap. And like, some people might still think I am, but it's that idea of, okay, I don't feel comfortable doing this. Let me try and let me start and let me learn from that.
And why did you feel into that uncomfortableness? Because some people would just go, hate the sound of my voice, don't want to do this, don't think I'm good enough, etc. And then just go, I'm just going to park it. I don't need to have these skills and experiences. Why push yourself to do that?
So I think by this time I'd guested on about 10 podcasts, and I got good feedback from that, was one thing. And I think part of it was, when I initially quit my job, what I was really worried about is the loneliness aspect. Because, as I mentioned earlier, it's like, I didn't know any entrepreneurs in the UK, basically.
Yeah.
All my network was American. So all my friends had day jobs. I was mainly on Zooms and interviews in the evening. What am I going to do? Like, how am I going to have that connection?
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, if I've got a podcast, that's a reason for me to then talk to different people. It's an excuse in some ways in that regard. And then it was also just that new challenge. I think because so when I quit my job, initially I was writing on the side. That blew up and I quit my job for that. But writing was an outlet because it wasn't my actual job. Whereas once that became my main thing, my main job, I was like, I need a new challenge.
Right.
And the podcasting was meant to be that challenge that was fun and no pressure. Obviously, that's changed now. But it's meant to just be like, this doesn't really matter. Like, if this doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. That's fine. So because I didn't really put pressure on it to be amazing, it's not going to get a million downloads. Then it's like, okay, here's a new thing. I'm just testing it out. Let me work out, how do you edit? How do you do these things? And it was just meant to be that new challenge. And then because I'm quite good at consistency, then now it's just
a consistent podcast that comes out and you're in 300 odd episodes.
This happens to me a fair amount of where I'll just do this for experiment, and then I carry on doing it for a long time. So that wasn't the plan at the beginning.
This episode is brought to you by Play for Change. Play for Change brings together leadership coaching, expert facilitation, and builds communities. They help craft real connections, spark learning, and turn play into powerful experiments to enable better relationships with yourself and others around you. To find out more, go to playforchange.co.uk. Links are in the show notes below. So talk to me about what you did, because you talked about quitting your job. So I don't actually know what you did, and or our listeners don't. And you talked about having this side job that blew up, which was writing. So talk to us about that little journey of life.
So my graduate job when I came out of university was in tech consulting.
Okay.
So CRM consulting, customer relationship management. It's as boring as it sounds in many ways. But
were you selling the product, creating the product?
So I was So it was
implementing
like
the
clients.
product?
Am I allowed to say the client? So clients were like the big multi-international companies.
Yep.
And what we were doing is helping them customize a software
Fine.
for their needs.
Yep.
So if you go to Vodafone Qatar, then I built the app in the store kind of thing, where it was like, how do you get the data to be easy to be used by the employees and things? It's hard for me. I did it for 7 years, but it's hard for me to explain now because it's such a different world. But it was good about that job is because it was project based, and because I wasn't really a techie, I kind of accidentally got that job. Then I was quite good at doing the description back to the business. So I could understand the business needs quite well because my background is economics. And then I learned the tech side of things. And again, the tech was a new challenge. But I had that full stack. So I would be the one talking to the client. I'd also be the one doing the design and like the UX side of things. And I'd also build the thing too. So for me, it was quite good because I had that full journey of everything going on there.
Right.
But the thing is, I knew I didn't want to do that long term. But once you go down a certain career track and then you get promoted and you get promoted again, it's like, what do I do now? Because if I change careers, I have to start at the bottom again. And I think many people listening would be on that idea of you don't really consider alternative careers because go to school, get good grades, go to good university, get good grades, get a job, go through the ladder, right?
Yep.
And there was this real, in my late 20s, like, well, I don't really, do I just carry on going? Like, you're chasing a promotion, but say, do I really want to do that job?
Yeah.
But you don't, like, at that time, entrepreneurship or doing anything different like that was really scary. So I remember just being in this phase of just a bit of limbo.
And you're not encouraged, to be perfectly honest, to do entrepreneurship. So when I went to school, it was go get a job. There was no such thing as go build a business, go create a business. Whereas at least now, I suppose, there are real role models out there that you can look up to and go, hey, there is this business, there is this. And you can see a lot more of that around than you could when I was growing up, at least.
So what happened to me is that, so I was always doing experiments and just stuff on the side. So I was still dancing, I was still doing other things. And then I started reading a lot on medium.com. So Medium is like the YouTube of writing, for people who aren't aware. So I was reading a lot on there. And the more you read on there, eventually you start getting stories about how people started writing and how they're making money and things like that. And I set myself a New Year's resolution of, let me try and start writing online. And again, like...
What, like a blog?
Yeah. But it's like, I didn't think anybody's going to read this. It was just more like, here's a new challenge, me being sophisticated, having a little hobby that like is productive, whatever. And the first article I wrote blew up and got 100,000 views.
Your first article you wrote? What was your first article?
4 Japanese concepts to transform your state of mind. So it's from the karate background, right? So I was very interested in Zen philosophy and that mindset of how do you transfer what I was learning from the martial arts and the mentality there into everyday life. And all of a sudden you get that first hit. It's like, oh, I'm kind of good at this, right? And then people were commenting on the story being like, oh, how did you find your writer's voice? I was like, I just wrote something, right? But what then happened is obviously the pandemic happened. So now all of a sudden I have way more time to write than I did before because you don't have a social life. And for the next few months, I didn't have another hit for it so I think until about May. So I was like, okay, I'm just a one-hit wonder here. But I started to get more involved in communities online, again, because you don't have anything else to do. So then I got my second hit, then the third hit came quicker. And then there's this purple patch. And all of a sudden, I was like, started to out-earn my day job from the writing online. And I took over the main entrepreneurs publication as the editor. So if you've heard of it, there's a company called Hopin. So Hopin was the fastest growing European startup at the time. So they went from 0 to 8 billion in 2 years. And the guy behind the publication, that was the entrepreneurs publication on Medium, Entrepreneur's Handbook, was the first employee there. So he got busy with his $8 billion company.
Yeah.
And he saw that I was quite good at helping people give advice. So he got me on to help with the editing with a guy called Michael Thompson, I was junior to him. So Michael Thompson was kind of helping me out there. And now all of a sudden I'm 6 months into writing, but all these people all across the world are sending me their articles for me to decide if it's good or not and to publish it.
Right.
So you'd get about, 200 articles a week and you'd publish 3 a day. It's like, I think it'd be about 20 articles a week, right? So there's a lot of me having to learn very quickly what's good quality, bad quality. And that helped me learn really quickly.
Right.
But also meant that my entrepreneurial network grew really fast because these people wanted something from me.
Yeah.
Because I'm the editor. I had the keys there, right? So that carried on going. And at some point, this crunch started to come into play because while I didn't have a social life, because pandemic and I wasn't really seeing people and stuff like that, I could do this. But if I had to go back to the office and the commuting time, all those things, this couldn't really work out anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Or I'd be a lot more tired. So I think I took a week off in February 2021.
Right.
And it was like, that was my week. I'm going to decide what I'm going to do in my life. And
Love it.
yeah. There's a lot of, at this point, there's a lot of stress and sleepless nights. And I remember like, when I get really stressed, what happens is I get like, pins and needles a lot.
Okay.
And my face goes all numb and like my jaw gets tight and my like teeth and I get pain. Not very fun. I don't recommend that level of stress. And I made this little PowerPoint presentation to say, okay, this is what my plan is. If I go full time, here's how I'm going to make money. Again, if I look back at that plan, it's probably like totally opposite to what I've done.
You should look back at that plan.
I wonder where I can find it somewhere. Yeah. But I'm presenting this to my family and my dad was just like, what are you doing? Like, it's like, you're going to be happy if you work for yourself, just go and work for yourself. Like, you don't need to convince me, but it's me trying to convince myself.
Right. So you're doing this presentation to your family.
Yeah, they didn't ask the presentation.
No.
I was just like, I wanted validation. Yeah, I was sending it to a few of my friends, and like my friends didn't really understand because a lot of them had like day jobs. So, but I just needed people to tell me what I'm doing isn't stupid.
Yeah.
And you have that whole worry. I was like, what if I quit my job and this all fails? And culturally, how you're brought up, all these different things, is that I've got this path. Okay, you achieve. What about if I quit my job and I look a complete idiot because it doesn't work out? And now I'm much more mature and I realize that. But at the time, that was really crushing to me. Like,
important.
And like, I remember those, once I handed my notice and then those next 3 months, it was like notice period. I was like, I'm an idiot. Should I have done this? There's so much doubt. But one of the things I really think was really good is my former CEO. He said, I'm not going to try and convince you to stay. He said, I think you should be doing what you're doing. He said, you've got that mindset where it's going to work out for you. And if you ever want to come back in the next year, come back, no questions asked. And the fact that, so it's like my dad, my family, like my bosses, it was really meaningful for me to have that. And I don't know if people being like, you're dumb, what you're doing, like my family was saying that, then I don't know where I would have quit.
So it was the fact that people were supporting your decisions that encouraged you to go for it. And you're saying that had they not been so supportive, you don't know if you would have done it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think it's important for me to admit that because I think so many people try to pretend like, oh, I was always confident. I always knew. It's like, I didn't know, right? And there was that stress and it is a very difficult decision for different people. And even at this stage, I was consistently earning more money from the outside. So it's like, okay, I've got a buffer here and things like that. But I still thought it was not necessarily even about the money. It was about, am I going to fail here?
It was about the credibility and what other people would say, I'm assuming.
The perception of what other people think, right? When it's, okay, I'm a consultant in the city. Cool, it's prestigious. People kind of get an idea. When it's like, I'm a full-time writer, people are like,
and you earn a living from full-time writing?
Yeah, it's that thing people question, like, it was just, and the whole identity is wrapped up in this job. For like I think a lot of people have that, right? It's like, people respect you because you've got a job that sounds important. And then now what I was doing is so different. And the stat I always like to bring out, which helps me when I was like trying to explain to people, is the only person who grew fast me during that period on medium.com was Barack Obama. So that kind of lent some credibility to what I was doing.
Wow. So the only person who grew faster than you was Barack Obama.
Yeah, so the only person who got to 50,000 followers faster than me during that period. So
the US president.
Yeah. And I feel like he's got an unfair advantage as well. I don't think it's
slightly.
Fair. I don't think it's fair. I don't think me and him are quite the same. So
that's impressive.
Yeah. And what then happened off the back of that, once I quit my job, then what I said is the first year I'm going to experiment. So don't put too much pressure on myself. Don't have to have things figured out. Just try lots of different things because now you have the time.
Right.
And see which is the one you want to do. So podcast is one of those experiments. I did a paid newsletter. I did ghostwriting, a ghostwrote a book proposal. I did a bunch of different things at that time for that first year. And in hindsight, what I did as well is just, I took full advantage of that freedom of just like, oh, I'll go and meet my friends in the middle of the day. I'll go and do this. I'll go and do that. And it was quite chaotic because I made it quite chaotic.
Yeah. You created the chaos for yourself.
Yeah. And then as that year mark started coming into play, then it's like, okay, I now need to think about which is the right path, because that basically first year is like, let me not make decisions based on the money side of things. Let me just base it on, let's see what I enjoy and what I'm good at. And then I can go all in one of those things. So I did online courses, all that stuff too. But then what happened at the end of that year is, I went to LA that year and I went to New York because a lot of the people I was working with out there. When I was in New York, like my dad collapsed with COVID, was sent to like the resuscitation ward. So I had to fly back early from that trip, not knowing whether or not he was going to be alive when I got back, basically. And that next month, what I did is I was in ICU. And what I was able to do then, which I'm quite proud of myself for doing, is like cancelled all my clients, cancelled all of that work to make sure that I was around my family. And that was a power I had because I was able to work for myself and the relationships I'd built. And even people working themselves, if you're a freelancer, something like that, and you tell your client, like, okay, look, this has happened, like, I need to step away. If they are angry at you because you want to be with a family member, then you don't want to continue them as a client anyway, is the way I looked at it. So, like, again, like, very grateful to the clients I had at that point to just be like, yeah, that's cool, cancel the contract, you do what you need to do. And then, so he was getting better, he was meant to come out of hospital, day was meant to come out, then they said, oh, he's got another infection, he's coming in for a few more days. Next day, call in the morning, he's got a few days left to live. At the end of that day, he actually seemed like it was improving. So, okay, we can go home. That's scary, but it looks like it's going to improve. Then next morning, a few hours to live, and then he passed away. And that was like August 2022.
So just to be clear, you were in New York, you get this phone call to say, Dad's in hospital, you fly back, he's doing well, he's supposed to be coming out of hospital, and he gets an infection. And then he's given literally days to live.
Yeah.
So it was sudden.
It's that weird thing because it was sudden, but it was in hospital. It's a really confusing emotional roller coaster, right? It's like, okay, he could have passed away initially straight away. He didn't. He survived that period. And then it's like, okay, he's going to come out of hospital. So, okay, really scary. He's going to have a long recovery period, but it's going to be okay. But then it was just that whole toying with your emotions, right? It's up and down. And even the night before he passed, he said like, oh, I feel a lot better early in the day. So he's like, oh, go home. I'll see you tomorrow. Like, you go and sleep at home kind of thing. So it was like, wait, it messes with you emotionally because you think, okay, that was scary, but it's okay. That was scary, but it's okay. But it's like, and then it happened, obviously, when it did. And then you go into full-on existential crisis about what's the point of any of this? What should I do? And what I did then is, the idea for the BHQ came while he was in hospital, but it was just meant to be a side thing. It was meant to be one of the things I did.
It was supposed to be a side thing.
But then once he passed, it took a lot more importance for me.
Why?
So
what happened during the time he was in hospital?
So he was meant to be one of the first podcast guests. He was meant to be behind it. So he was at retirement age, so he was going to help out and things like that too. So once he passed, then we got letters from his clients being like, your dad is the reason why my business didn't go down 20 years ago. He's the reason I could put food on the table. He's the reason why I've got a roof over our heads. So what I was thinking is that I don't have the same skill set as my dad, but what I have is this other skill set, which I can then unite people. And what we're trying to do with the community, right? So, and at the initial thing, I did it intentionally, right? So I knew at that time, basically, you got to overwhelm the grief, right, with something.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't deal with the emotion, basically. So some people use drugs, some people use alcohol, some people use like whatever they use, right? And I was like, work is probably the least damaging of these. So what I did is overwork myself for the next year on something which I think was positive. So like, if I'm gonna do something destructive for myself here, let it be towards a good reason, right? And now, 2 years later, I can see what I did to myself in terms of like overworking and putting an incredible amount of pressure on myself, right? Because if I'm doing what I'm doing dedicated to my dad's memory, I have to be perfect. And now it's not eased, but there's more processing has happened. Where now it's about, when I quit my job, then my dad was the reason why I quit my job, because he believed in me. Most people from my background don't have somebody who believes in them.
Yeah.
So if this community can be that for other people, then that I think is a good way to honor him. At the same time as I can't be perfect and I'm going to make loads of mistakes. And I think I'm more accepting of that element now than it was before. Whereas earlier it's like, nothing can go wrong, because if anything goes wrong, that means I'm a bad person. It means that I'm not
honoring Dad.
Yeah. So now that element is shifting away a bit more to, okay, and it's the thing as well, I think I mentioned even earlier about when I was at school and things like that too, is my dad would have been proud of me no matter what. He was that kind of person. So some people, like when I have like impressive stuff, they're like, oh, your dad would be so proud. It's like, my dad wouldn't really care. Like my dad would be more happy about me being happy. My dad would be telling me off most of the time for overworking. Like I need to look after myself more rather than like, oh, you did this or you did that. Like,
what a beautiful reflection on knowing that he adores you regardless.
and that's the thing, I'm very lucky. So, okay, I lost my dad when I did.
Yeah.
But the way I look at it is that a lot of people don't have that relationship with somebody. So I'm privileged in many ways. And that's how that's my mental hoops of trying to justify myself, is that I'm lucky rather than focusing on the loss. So I
And
had
using
30
that
years.
loss to drive what happens next and in your life, and using that privilege, as you call it, for good.
Yeah. Like I had 30 years with somebody who believed in me. A lot of people don't have that. So in many ways, obviously I'm sad about the loss and things like that, but it's also, can I use that in a positive way for people who don't have that? Because actually I'm quite lucky to have even had that in the first place.
So you've just shared a really thoughtful, heartbreaking moment in your life that has then given you what you're currently doing. And you talk about it with real openness and real heart. And having come from the environment and the culture that we come from, talking about something like grief and losing your dad and almost shedding a tear isn't what men were taught to do. How are you so comfortable, or what makes you so comfortable, given the context in which we grew up?
I think it's because I've seen what happens if you don't. I've seen, like as I mentioned earlier, about the people who've either drink away their problems, or they pass away young, especially Punjabis. That's a very stereotypical thing. Men don't express their emotions. What do? They drink instead. They die early. Their kids have to deal with that. Then you have the other side of things where you just see the destructive behaviors that happen with people who don't open up. And it's funny because a lot of my writing before my dad passed away was all about this intentionality and how do you balance your emotions and how do you do those things. Whereas what I did when my dad passed away is all my systems were tested and all my systems broke. And what I did is overwork myself instead.
Yeah.
But what I knew very clearly is like, I can't bottle this up, because if I bottle this up, what happens to me is what I've seen happen to other people, and I can't allow that to happen. And I think about this quite a lot too in terms of why I'm able to do it. And part of it comes because I've done so many things in my life, which I think are beyond what I thought I was capable of in some ways. So the karate background, the obstacle course races, I think I've done enough to myself now to prove I'm tough. And what I've had a lot from people when I do open up, especially Asian men, is that a lot of them say, I feel the same way, but I would never have the guts to say that. And to know that other people are dealing with the same things is very helpful to them.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good work being done now, I think, in the Asian community to try and change those behaviors. But it is the interesting challenge of people can say one thing online, but it's the whole thing of how you actually acting with the people around you. So if somebody around you know they're struggling, are you trying to avoid them?
Yeah.
Are you actually supporting them? Are you allowing them to have that space to feel open to talk about it? Or are you posting stories about, oh yeah, I love mental health and men should talk up, but then actually you avoid those people, and it's that kind of making sure it's not performative. So that's why I said, if I'm writing all this stuff about how you should be open, how you should be emotionally mature, and the first thing I do is bottle up, it's like, well, I'm now a hypocrite.
Yeah.
So there's an element of that, like I need to make sure that what I believe is the same way I'm acting.
You have to walk the walk.
Yeah. And one of the things I did before, I think it was a few months before my dad passed away, I made a little promise myself that whenever somebody asked me how I'm doing, I never lie. And then once my dad passed away, I was like, it's a really stupid decision. I wish I just didn't say that, because then what happened is I said so many times that story, and I think it was important to not bottle it up, to allow that to destroy me from the inside. And what I've tried to work out over the last year is how much of that is useful and cathartic to me, and how much is just dredging up painful memories.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure on the balance, but I'm experimenting with it. I'm trying to work out, is me talking about it helping me still? Or is this actually now just reliving the trauma over and over again? And that, I think, hopefully it's come across. But now what I focus on a lot is that self-awareness aspect, where I constantly question why I do the things, why I do them. Why do I do this? Is it because of a running towards something or running away from something?
Yep.
And that's something I play on quite a lot with myself, is why. And it's even expanding my old behaviors of why did I do that? Why am I in this way? Why did I send that message for? Why did I word it in that way? That wasn't, like, I should be better than that. Why did I allow that to get to me? And it's just playing with that a lot more, of understanding my actions and do they align with what I say I believe.
How much of what you've just talked about aligns with you and your siblings, for example? Because, and again, I could be completely wrong, but you're one boy with two sisters on either side, so you're the sandwich in between. So is there something around the feminine influence in your life and your mum now, with you being the only masculine? And that's not to say your sisters don't have masculine traits, just the feminine and the masculine. And does that play any role in how you think about these things and how you come across?
I think it definitely does. And it opens you to other experiences. And the other thing I think is a factor here too is because I went to an all-boys school. So for a lot of my teenage years, most of the time I was interacting with boys, and boys in a mentality of at that time, it's like you've got to be tough, you've got to be hard, whatever. And when I was in university, obviously, then now I had a lot more female friends. And that's probably something which shifted me over time, is that greater female influence of who I talk to. Whereas when I was in my teenage years, overwhelmingly I was talking to other guys, and you have that weird alpha situation in different classrooms and things like that, where you're trying to work out that dominance.
Yeah.
So I definitely think the influence of my sisters, and it was also like I'd say they're way stronger than I am in many ways. And there's a lot, so it's an interesting thing, because my dad has passed away, then I'll talk about him quite openly. Whereas my sisters and my mum, I don't talk about as much, but they're also a massive influence on me, and the positive impacts they've had. And I mentioned before about all these different things I did when I was a kid. It's because my mum was willing to drive me around and put that sacrifice in.
Yeah.
So there's so many different reasons. Like, I talk about the luck of why I am where I am. And so much of that to do, I was very lucky to be born into the family I was. Not necessarily because we're billionaires or anything like that, but just they actually cared about me. Yeah. And I'm very lucky to have parents who cared about me.
Yeah. Being very privileged to be in a loving household where they gave a shit in the nicest possible way.
Yeah.
What's the one question I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
I guess it's, what have I learned from this self-awareness part that other people could learn from? And I think that's the key element, which is what I try to tell people, is that you don't have to be right all the time, and you can allow yourself to be wrong. And what happens is, if you're lying to yourself, then you're going to lie to everybody else too. And sometimes it's okay to just be like, actually, why do I do this? Am I doing this because I want to do it, or because I'm trying to impress somebody? And in my line of work now, for me, it's really interesting to see like different journeys of people at the beginning, where maybe they are led by insecurity. And it's a very common thing for a lot of people trying to achieve successful things, to be really driven actually by insecurity and needing to prove themselves to, whether it's their parents, whether it's to themselves, whether it's their girlfriend, their wife, their husband, whatever it is, that I can do this. But is that the right reason to be living your life, to prove something to somebody else? And if you actually look at it from a step back, is, do I do this for myself, or do I do it for others? And once you get a bit further ahead, I say that there's some people who are billionaires and they still have the same mentality of, I need to prove everybody wrong. Whereas other people who get to a certain stage, which what I'm trying to work towards, where actually is post-ego in some ways. I'm not doing this to impress anybody else anymore. I'm doing it because it's something I believe in, and something which excites me. And it's looking at your own life, and it's, do I do these things? So, for example, I've been to nearly 50 countries, right? Why have I done that? Because I can say I've been to nearly 50 countries and it sounds cool. Is that side of things really important to me? Or was it an element of, I want to be cool, or people to think I've got such an amazing life? because I post pictures from these places. And I enjoyed those trips, but I can also be open and honest about it years later that actually a lot of that travel was, I want to show the pictures. I want people to know that I'm exciting and adventurous. Whereas now I lead a life which I don't need to escape from.
Yeah.
And if you get to that point, I think that's the ultimate aim, is like, can you just enjoy the everyday?
When you think about the next 5 years, what excites you the most?
There's so many things. So I'm quite excited by the fact by 5 years ago, I was tech consultant, no idea I was even going to start writing, no idea I'd ever quit my job. None of the things I do today were even on the radar at all. Even say 3 years ago, the stuff I'm doing now, I never thought 3 years ago I'd be doing something for the British Asian community.
Yeah.
It wasn't on my radar. I was very much focused on America. So what's exciting in some ways is that I have no idea where I'm going to end up. So there's different paths, directions I'm moving towards. So writing books, the growth, I think, especially in the student side of what we're doing. So I've probably spoken to 1,000 or so students in the last year. Can we really ramp up that side?
Yeah.
Because what's going to be really exciting for me when I look at those lessons my dad got is one of these kids that I've given a talk to in the last year, in 30 years' time, okay, they heard about a community, then started coming to our events, they got an internship through us, got a mentorship through us, they went through an accelerator we maybe build in the future, then potentially going to build a fund in the future. Can we then invest in that person? Can we be in every stage of that person's life cycle? And in 30 years' time, we completely transform their life. And not just their life, when somebody who's an entrepreneur is going to try and make a difference, we've enabled the impact for everybody else too, in that effect there. But so we're 2 years in now. What I've always said, in 5 years, in the first 5 years of the company, I want it to be that people forget that I made it.
Yeah.
And I think of it in terms of football analogy is Sir Alex Ferguson. So greatest manager of all time. So I'm a United fan because I'm from London, obviously. So, but then after he left, it's been shambles in many ways. So I'm looking at this, can I make this sustainable? Where after I leave, it's not a cult about, oh, I'm so amazing, oh, look what I can do. It's about, can I build the system of sustainability?
Yeah.
So that in 30 years' time,
it's still a community that continues.
Yeah. So people look at it as an institution rather than, oh, that's Amardeep's thing.
Yeah.
And I've got a co-founder as well. People always forget about Gerther as well. So shout out to him. And people are like, but you've got a co-founder? It's like, yeah, he just doesn't post because we've got different roles, right?
Yeah. We started this conversation with who is Amardeep. If we go round 360 degrees based on the conversation we've just had, is there anything you would change or adapt to who you are?
So he also said about me living aggressively in the present. So I can't remember what I said 5 minutes ago, let alone at the beginning of the episode. So what did I say? So I think when I look back at who I am, a huge part of that is that what I try is that emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and that element is something which, as the Bay HQ grows and we hire more people, that's the side I'm going to explore more and more too, about really trying to understand myself and how I can help those lessons with other people. And it's something I really enjoy too, but it's just the missions at different times. It's that different seasons of life. So I think that's a really big part of me is that self-reflection and trying to, when I obviously have loads of bad traits that I want to get better at, but it's being able to identify those and work on them all the time rather than just get lost in my own hype. And I think it's very easy when somebody's doing something in the public sphere or somebody's doing something public to just get lost in the, oh my God, you're so amazing. It's like, no, but I've got this other things to do. I need to get better at this. And I think sometimes it's very easy to get addicted to praise. And what you've got to be listening to is what you think is right rather than just what's going to
give you more validation.
Yeah. And it's making sure that I don't ever turn into that validation of like, oh, I'm so amazing. Oh, this. It's like I said, it's like so much luck involved in what I've done. And what I've got to do is use that luck in a way that is effective to help other people. And if I can do that, I've done something good in life.
I don't believe it's luck, but that's probably a conversation for another day. Thank you so much for your time, and we loved having you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe, follow, and like. It really helps us continue to grow. Keep being you through connection, learning, and play. You are a class of your own.